So, yeah, following on from what I was saying earlier, basically, what role does social media play in informing patients? Now, I know that, like I was saying earlier, a lot of you don't use social media that much, but I know from my job, where I use it quite a lot, that people are actually out there looking for information. So it's all about kind of like how we can get that information to them. So I'll just, well, where you go? Okay, so what is social media? The way I see it, it's media allows people to do two-way communication about the content they put out. Now, normal websites, they work, well, I say normal websites, Web 1.0 websites work out that you put information and people just consume it. Web 2.0 allows you to, the person reading it, to comment or give back some form of feedback about your content, and that's what social media basically is. So it includes things like blogs, forums, social networks like Facebook and Twitter, and mailing lists. I know a lot of people forget about stuff like that, but really old, I say old, but it's, like really kind of old school stuff is pretty much what I would consider social media. Now, how do patients find information on social media? Do they talk directly to healthcare organisations? I know at St George's we've had patients who have actually come to us and said, like, I'm in the pharmacy department, I can't see, and there's no actual proper descriptions in Braille about how I would take this medication. Where can I get, for instance, an audio transcription of that? And obviously we then worked with the pharmacy team to find out the information for this. So it is being used in that way. Also, like I was saying earlier about building communities. Now, I said about you guys building communities, but the fact is patients do this too, and there are existing communities out there. For instance, there's kidney patient communities. I think they use like a PDE or something hashtag for that, about their diets. I think it's the right one anyway. But, they're out there, so what's to say that other patients aren't doing that? And it's all about kind of like finding your relevant field and then finding those people, essentially. And also, not so much the actual hospital, but the charity, St George's Charity, they've had actual people who have been, their families have been fundraising for them, but the actual patient themselves have been blogging about their experience within the hospital. There's a gay, that is a massive Freudian slip. There's a guy called David Adamson, I think, actually. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, but he was blogging about, I think he had some form of cancer, I think it was like leukemia or something like that, and he was blogging about his daily struggle, basically. His family were feeding back and friends as well, but there was nothing to stop kind of other people reading that and essentially learning more about his kind of battle with cancer from that way. Most important one is, and I think Glenn covered this yesterday when we were talking, is it right for healthcare organisations to intervene with people's chat? There's a big debate about it, and we have that quite regularly on our NHSSM chats. I'm kind of on the fence. I personally, if I was to give consent to my doctor to look at my online stuff, I'd be quite happy with that. But obviously you can't judge this just by people chattering away. It's not right, but obviously if you do kind of explain to your doctor and they are actually on the social media networks and you say like, yeah, if you ever kind of just want to step in at some point and tell me what I'm doing wrong, then that's fine with me. They might object to it, but if they're okay with that, then yeah, I'm okay with that. Massive one, massive one. How credible is the information? You're talking, you're basically getting your information from other people. How can you tell that the stuff that they've gone through, like their medication and all that, is actually going to be the same? There's a kind of an issue with Twitter, the fact that they stopped doing, I think it's verification, where you get like a tick and that says that you're actually the person you claim to be. They used to do that, and I think like Obama or like the American president, he had one of those, so that people could actually tell that it was his campaign and not someone just trying to hijack it. But it's very important that, as a hospital and as a healthcare organisation, that you actually start to kind of make sure that people know who you are, because otherwise they won't be able to trust the content that you put out. It might just be content as simple as like, an apple a day will help kind of like keep the doctor away, etc. But the fact is people won't be able to exactly trust the sources that they get their information from. Also, yeah, do patient groups function better online, or do they, offline? One problem I have with the internet is that nowadays we tend to be kind of going towards a more text-based communication. Now, the problem with text-based communication is that the fact that the person on the other end has to perceive how you're saying stuff. Now, you could say something the exact same way, but it could be negative and positive. So how are you going to tell, this experience from this patient? So that kind of makes me think, like, it's great having patient groups online, but shouldn't that initially, well, not initially, through down the line, actually translate into offline meeting? To kind of since maybe there's like a kind of a London-based patient group, but obviously London's a quite big city. These people aren't going to be able to get together all the time, but once every 2 months or so, just so they can actually like kind of put names to faces and stuff like that. Because that's one big thing about the internet. You can never really tell who you're actually talking to. So it's good to kind of build up those kind of proper in real life, I suppose you might want to call it, connections. All right. Now, interacting with patients, should someone who's clinically connected to them, their GP, etc., that actually sees them, be able to interact with them online in any way? Because obviously they're going to have that connection with people. They might not be likely to say the real stuff they want to say. They might not, they may tailor their messages essentially towards that person and that connection they have with them. So there's a big thing. Also, communications teams. Now, that's pretty much where my kind of understanding of social media within the NHS is that it's always comms teams. You hardly find any GPs who will take it up. Maybe there's a GP who has a blog, but majority of the time it will literally be the communications team. Now, it's about, essentially, how do healthcare pros actually communicate through the communications team? And should the communications team actually be actively seeking to involve that kind of that kind of involvement in the process? Well, we obviously, we try to get departments to respond to us when we have these questions on Twitter, but sometimes it can take 2 weeks for a message to come back, and that's not really part of what social media is. It's very kind of real time. Yeah. Also, as I mentioned before earlier about setting up your own personal accounts. Now, obviously, you should, and I actively think that people should, start exploring these things, even if it is just to see what they're about. But, you've got to kind of think about essentially like how you talk about the organisation that you would represent if you were in a GP or a healthcare organisation setting. So there is some training. I mean, it's more just kind of like my general rule of thumb is that if you wouldn't say it to someone in real life, you wouldn't say it online. It's just a general thing. But there are actual kind of blog posts out there that will deal with this kind of stuff. So it's a good thing, like when you do think about actually doing that, to actually kind of look those up. And also, this is a massive one that we always face on these chats. It's internal communications. Maybe not so in a GP practice, but in a hospital, there is literally, you're talking thousands of staff. Now, how do you get one message to another? Well, obviously, you've got email, but the fact is the email is not really that kind of, it goes there, and it's so quick. You'll get people who just will skim through their email box and kind of only look for the red flags and stuff like that. So it's more about kind of opening up, kind of, well, maybe like within an hour communication between staff, so that we can start actually getting the information out. Like I said, we did the pharmacy thing where we emailed the pharmacy, and luckily they came back quite quick. But obviously, if it was a case of this person's about to take it and it's the time they have to take the medication, then it's kind of adamant that it's very fast. By the way, if anybody actually wants to experiment with doing internal communication networks based around email addresses, I'd suggest you try Yammer. It's a very good tool. It's essentially like Twitter for a closed network. And I think the DH and Southampton Hospital Trust actually use it as well, just as a kind of, how to kind of open up that communication. And yeah, one of the big issues, and I imagine this will cause a lot of debate, is should we actually be encouraging people to talk about their health information in public? I'm not necessarily turning around and saying like, yeah, okay, you need to be saying to everybody that you've got this problem, but you know, by turning around to a patient and saying there are resources online that you could use to essentially, you know, find other people with your illness, and therefore you could get more information and kind of get that patient experience from those people. You know, you're essentially turning around and like saying, well, just tell everybody you've got, you know, problems with your kidneys and stuff like that. So there is a bit of a thing when you say like how, you know, interacting with patients, we want to kind of be informing them in this manner, but then obviously, you know, you're essentially asking people to open up too much information about themselves, which they might not feel comfortable with. Right, now this is where I come in, because I'm a tech person. I like to get things working and tell people what they can do. It's, you know, how can social media be used to actually inform people? Now, blogs are a really good way for, well, patients and clinical staff to build up a massive body of stuff. Now, from a patient's perspective, from a patient kind of, perspective, it's good for them to kind of keep a diary about their experiences. Not personally suffered from a massive illness, but I've had friends who had serious illnesses, and they find that kind of having a diary that other people can then turn around and say, you know, like, I'm sorry to hear, or like, you know, I tried this and it worked much better, really helps them. And from a clinical point of view, a lot of people, when they've got views on stuff, they like to build them up and to kind of, you know, become known for doing stuff. And, you know, by having a blog and just literally not necessarily doing stuff about, like, you know, their patients and stuff like that, but about the actual subject that they studied, you know, to continue that kind of learning process, it's very good for them to build up an article, a body of work, really, which, of course, then they can share with other people, and you start to get that information going around, which is ideally what, you know, you should be doing with the internet, even if it is not based on patients. Also, forums. If you guys do go on Twitter and you check out the NHSSM hashtag on Wednesday at 8, we are going to be discussing forums. And the general view is that it allows patients to discuss their illnesses over a closed network. There is, you know, some people who would suggest that it's open to spam, but as long as it's moderated, as with everything on the internet, as long as moderation is done, there's not going to be any issues. Yeah, like I've said before, Twitter, it's a really good conversational tool, and that's what it should be used as, not just as a news stream. So, yeah, patients would hopefully, if they were like kind of, you know, okay with their diseases and, well, not illnesses, sorry, bad word, but if they were okay with discussing this online with other people, they would be able to use it to find others similar to them and be able to then kind of gain a better knowledge about a broader spectrum of that particular illness they have. You know, you might have just one kind of cancer, but, you know, it helps to kind of learn the pathways and what other people go through, even if they don't particularly have the same thing. Yeah, Facebook, I really don't feel great about it. It's good in a sense that you can get a kind of more personal network based around a particular subject. So, for instance, charities and hospitals and stuff like that. But it's too personal, really. Yeah, like I've said, Yammer is a really, really good service for getting that kind of internal communication out there, which would ideally, you know, it might not inform the patient, but at the same time, the information exchange that goes within that will ideally, you know, come out at some point with someone being able to pretty much within half an hour tell someone they're with, you know, a kind of second opinion from that person without having to go through email. And my personal favorite is Foursquare. It's a geolocation service, and I use it at work. When you check in, sorry, I should explain. Geolocation basically means that, you know, you would go to a place, you have an iPhone or an Android phone, and then you'll be able to check into a particular venue. So, for instance, you go to St. George's Hospital, you check into there. Now, you can see what other tips that people have left. Now, what I've done is I've made sure that we put our Welcome to St. George's information leaflets as tips on there. So people who come in, you know, they might be just here to visit someone, or they might have come in and they'll be sitting in their bed and they can't have access to this book because maybe there aren't any copies of lying around or anything. They could check in on Foursquare, download this PDF, and they could read that book within their, like, you know, their phone without having to actually go somewhere to get it. It's about bringing the information essentially to the patient as opposed to making them go places.